Hello, this is Paul Lennon here again, getting on your nerves from my, as you can see, professional studio here in Guatemala, far away from the maddening crowd, one might say. And this is the fifth tape in the series I'm doing, commenting, reading, and commenting on my memoir, Our Father Maciel, Our Father who art in bed, naive and sentimental Dubliner in the Legion of Christ. And thank you for bearing with me. And hopefully, this will ease you through our terrible times with the coronavirus all over the world and hitting some of our dearest countries, as we know, besides China, uh, Italy, Spain, France, British Isles, uh, Republic of Ireland, and now the USA and Canada. So, have you all present in the back of my mind, in my heart, in my thoughts. Anyway, I think I pressed the wrong button there a while ago and didn't finish the end of chapter 4, which I was getting very excited about when I was commenting on how this guy at the house in Bundoran, excuse me, um, he was the guy who knew about Spain, and he was kind of pulling our legs to a tremendous extent during our postulancy there, uh, our 6 weeks postulancy. Anyway, we were talking about being in Spain and so forth, and what were the Spaniards like, and then what do they eat, and they carve a lamb of what is it? A lamb of mutton, and this is a jamon serrano. And then we were saying, what about butter? Is important. Butter, we Irish, we're bread and butter kind of folks. So, what do they have butter in Spain? Yes, Jim told us not to worry. They have butter is just similar to ours, except that it has a red streak coming down the middle of it. Really? There you go. Such was the naive and romantic Catholic boy who looked out the window as a train pulled into the station at Irun in, I think it must have been is that the Basque country? Not sure, in Spain. And and by the way, of course, a correction. I'm talking about Lourdes or Lourdes correction, which I think I had in where was it, in northern France or something. And of course, it's in the south of France, where France meets the north of Spain, right? And Basque country, basically, shall we say. Anyway, this was it. Examining the Basque people in the station, I was relieved to see they were shorter, perhaps, than your average Irishman. But when I noticed that they were all seemed to be shouting angrily at each other, even the women in their black shawls, a certain apprehension crept over me. Then someone explained that they were just gesticulating. That's it, gesticulating. What's all this going on here? Um, Yeah, and that's the way they talk, gesticulating. They're Latin people. They get excited about things, and my stomach muscles at that point kind of tended to relax. All was well again in Camelot. San Sebastian. A large group of legionaries had driven from Salamanca, Spain. You can imagine, to meet and greet us. Now it was time to meet Mexico, because many of those brothers, confreres of ours, were from Mexico. I believe a certain Father Jose Bustamante, I think he was the one who was driving, a sleek haired Mexican wearing tinted glasses and a broad smile, very quiet, kind of serene kind of a guy, was at the wheel of the large and shiny Mercedes coach. Because of the historic occasion, three normally isolated legionary communities, as they were called, they never spoke among each other. They would have been the theology students, padres teólogos, the philosophy students, brothers, called hermanos filósofos, and the humanitarian students, oh, excuse me, Humanities students called hermanos juniores were allowed to speak to each other so they could greet. And here we're talking about the love bombing, which they talk about in cultic literature. We were showered with fraternal affection and hugs as we tried to communicate in Spanish and English. Some of the theology students knew a few words of English, and they were thrilled to be able to practice just as we to try out our first stumbling efforts at Spanish. In hindsight, I remember Mexican Salvador Maciel among the welcoming committee, maybe because he had the last name as Nuestro Padre. Roberto Gonzalez, uh, who was really a leader, a very talented Mexican man. He later, at a much later stage, worked at the Vatican Congregation for Bishops. He was planted there by Maciel, and later was found out that he had been carrying secrets from the Congregation for Bishops back to the mother house in Rome to Father Maciel, he thought he could influence the choice of bishops in various parts of the world, especially Mexico, Spain, where they could influence, uh, the Catholic public, and also where they could protect the legion from many attacks. There was also a Mario Amesco Maciel, and he was effectively a, uh, a nephew of Father Maciel. He was married to Father Maciel's sister. I'm not sure, Olivia, perhaps. Um, and he hung out. I noticed that he hung out a lot with Roberto. They kind of got on well together, despite the fact that in the Legion you were not supposed to have these particular friendships. These were kind of banned, no particular friendships. It ended up being so strict, this band, that we had no friendships whatsoever, whether I explained this before or will do so again, but this was quite trying and quite abnormal not to be able to be friends with anybody. Speak about this later, I think, in the next chapter. I think Raul de Anda, who I clashed with later and later on in my legionary career, and who was one of Father Maciel's favorites. And he also was, while I was working at the School of Faith, he was working at another Maciel initiative, a family center in Mexico City called Alpha y Omega. As you can see for names, there's no problem. They greeted us with the new thing we were learning, the legionary abrazo, hug. According to the rule, members could only touch each other this way when they were hugging on the occasion of meeting or taking leave. So here we get an idea. I want to give you an idea of the strangeness of this, of the paradox. Quel paradoxe. One of my few words in French. Here is the pedophile, predatory, serial pedophile abusing his seminarians at this very same time and having relationships with older legionaries too, because he started off grooming them into puberty. One of these days I'll explain his whole specialty, shall we say, but he groomed them into puberty, and then the ones he was more fond of and the ones who were kind of in love with him, bless their souls, sometimes they carried on the relationship with him and feeling even more and more special because the holy man, they were part of his inner circle. My good friend Alejandro Espinosa, who has written a very, very tough memoir called El Legionario, describes in some detail what the victims were exposed to. Along the way, our newfound brothers sang wonderfully for us in 4-part harmony. Mexicans and Spaniards, they're very musical, very talented. Community singing, we discovered, was part of the Legion spirit. Pierce Allen, our leader from Bundoran, had been there longer than the 3 Dubliners, as I told you, and he encouraged us to sing, to join with the brothers, with the Mexican and Spanish brothers. And we had been rehearsing our song since Bondoran. It's a long way to Tipperary. It's a long way to Salamanca. It's a long way to go. It's a long way to Salamanca, to the nicest town I know. Farewell, Bondoran. Farewell, Bondrawes. Farewell, Bondoran town. It's a long, long way to Salamanca, and our hearts are there. Went off very well, and the legionaries, our new confreres, gave us many cheers. Porras, as they, nos echaron porras, as they say in Spanish in Mexico. Learning and joining in these hoorays became part of our initiation into our new language and culture. We were gung-ho, and anyway, with the Irish are good mixers. It must have been back in San Sebastian at El Correo Francés, a small hotel which apparently Maciel liked, that Declan began playing the piano for Father Maciel. We all wanted to please Father Maciel, so Declan sat at the upright piano at the hotel and played Perfidia, which was actually a Mexican tune which was very popular at that particular time. Da 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 dee da 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 dee dee da 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 dee da da dee da da. We had no idea what the lyrics said, but they're pretty little bit risque, for future seminarians and holy priests. To you my heart cries out perfidia, for I find you the love of my life in somebody else's arms. Perfidia means betrayal. With a sad lament, my dreams are faded like a broken melody, while the gods of luck look down and laugh at what romantic fools we mortals can be. And now I find my love was not for you, and so I take it back with a sigh. Perfidia's one. Goodbye. Hey, do I get a prize or something for this? Perhaps our leader's eyes twinkled mischievously at the very worldly lyrics. Not knowing Spanish or English lyrics, I was not overly embarrassed listening to this music in front of a priest. Well, he was not just an ordinary priest, but a veritable living saint. Chapter 5, or letter, chapter 5, renouncing the self in Salamanca. And shall we start with our good friend Siddhartha? Short quotation. Siddhartha, at this stage of his life, of his quest, had one single goal: to become empty of thirst, desire, dreams, pleasure, and sorrow, to let the self die. This is very Buddhist, I think. No longer to be self, to experience the peace of an emptied heart, to experience pure thought. That was his goal. When all the self was conquered and dead, when all the passions and desires were silent, then at last must awaken the innermost being that is no longer self, the secret, the great secret. End of quotation. Salamanca. The Spanish are very proud, as we said before. I think they're proud of being proud, in good sense of the word. Pride, what's the word? Dignified pride. And so I learned that Salmantinos, people from there, they would call Salamanca their beloved town, city, historic, full of history, full of beauty, full of architecture, full of culture, with their famous romantic river, Alba de Tormes, with memories of of Saint Teresa, perhaps, and Fray Luis de Leon, very famous priest, monk, and poet from the golden age of Spanish poetry, Fray Luis de Leon. Anyway, they would call their city Roma la Chica, Little Rome. It was one of the first university cities of Europe. It was also a city full of seminaries. Maybe that's why they called it Roma la Chica. There were so many students preparing for the priesthood for long, long, long periods of time. There even was an Irish college in Salamanca, which is now vacated. But I remember going to visit it, and it's called El Colegio de los Nobles Irlandeses, the school, college, university of the noble Irish. As our Mercedes bus wound its way up and over the Spanish Pyrenees, Nuestro Padre Maciel bought cider for us and was amused by our tipsy reaction to that peculiar alcoholic beverage. It was stronger than the Bulmer's cider that we drink in Ireland, that we were accustomed to. Some of the more scrupulous members of our comité, the Irish group, may have thought twice about drinking this because we would be breaking our pledge of abstinence from alcohol, which we made at the time of our confirmation. But in this case, we need not worry. Echoing the gospel verses, were we not like the disciples in the bridegroom's presence? Jesus said, why are you worried? Why shouldn't we rejoice? Because the bridegroom is with you. We thought we were with another Messiah, another Mashiach of the New Testament of the 20th century. All in all, this experience of camaraderie was pleasant. Santander, with its mountains, rivers, and green landscape, seemed like a sunny version of Ireland. Unfortunately, this bewitched phase began to draw to a close as we headed south through increasingly austere scenery, nearing our Castilian novitiate in Salamanca. Castile. Mountains, rivers, and trees gave way to plains, stubble, and parched earth. Remember, this is the end of August. Although Teresa of Avila was proud of this unending horizon, saying, more heaven than earth, más cielo que tierra. You know, that it's all heaven, it's all horizon, all over, and you can see from one side of the horizon to the other. This arid panorama, with no place to hide from the scorching sun, did not bode well for the boys in green. Crisis counseling. A small spring gushed up in the middle of the geographical and emotional desert, offering momentary respite. This was our holy novitiate in Salamanca. When we when we entered into the driveway at Ciudad Jardín, Salamanca, the first day in early September 1961, the gardens and the red brick and glass building, built, we were told, to Nuestro Padre's instructions and specifications, was an attractive sight. Our companions pointed out to us the words in large bronze letters over the entrance. It said in Latin, Christus vita vestra, meaning Christ, your life. Jesus Christ would now be our model from this moment on. And I have one whole year with nothing else to do except to be transformed into another Christ. The ideal resonated deeply within me. Here was the hero above all other idols and heroes. God and man, perfect in his divinity and perfect in his humanity. Being ever a lover of books, I avidly read and studied the book that was recommended to us, Jesus Christ, written by the German theologian Karl Adam, very popular during that time. I read it all during my novitiate. And a strange thing happened. I don't know whether despite or in the middle of the most horrendous crisis of my life, I read that book and maybe got something out of it. But by then I was desperately trying to recover my faith. Shortly after arriving in Salamanca in early September, lightning struck. Suddenly and without warning, storm clouds, gathering quietly since I stepped into the novitiate, exploded. I had come here to give it all up for Jesus, and suddenly Jesus was nowhere to be found. My mind blurred with fuzzy confusion. My leaden heart fell at my feet. I began doubting everything. My reason raged like a demon, demanding tangible proof. Had Jesus of Nazareth really existed? Had he risen from the dead? Was he really the Son of God? Where was he? I could not understand, believe, or feel anything. Maybe Jesus was hiding, as Saint Therese of Lisieux once playfully said, but I was in no humor for games. My mind was a blank, black screen, my heart full of panic and despair. During the week-long retreat before taking the habit in September the 15th, Feast of Our Lady of Sorrows, what, what a coincidence, right? What an ironic coincidence. Our Lady of Sorrows was the patroness of the Legion, from the original name of the Legion, which is Missionaries of the Sacred Heart of Jesus and of Our Lady of Sorrows. Then, of course, it was changed to the more fashionable and attractive Legionaries of Christ. I had to unburden my soul to someone. I went to confession to the one legionary priest who, thank God, spoke English, Father Jose Maria Sanchez. His crinkly hair, large, pudgy frame, soft voice, effeminate and creepy manner did not inspire a lot of confidence, but there was no one else to go to. I feel terrible. I don't know what's come over me. My mind is blurred. My faith is confused. I can't feel or see God. I'm doubting everything, including the existence of God. His advice was clear and reassuring. No te preocupes. Oh, no se preocupe. Excuse me. We had to use the what is it called? The courteous form of the Spanish language. Sorry. No se preocupe. Don't worry. That's a temptation from the devil. He's trying to take your vocation away from you. It will soon go away. Carry on. Take the habit. It's at the end of the spiritual exercise call. Right ahead. Oh my God. Here I was, thanks to Father James' meditations, feeling like Peter on the Sea of Galilee. The Lord was telling me, cast your nets for the catch, although I couldn't for the life of me see one single fish. I had to summon up some heroic faith from the depths of my soul and blindly cry, in your name I will cast the nets. I received the legionary uniform for the hands of our Father, Father Maciel. Thus began what I believed were my doubts of faith. That's what I was calling them, my description. My own peculiar and personal dark night of the soul. I was no St. John of the Cross. That first big crisis of faith, probably a mixture of homesickness and a sense of dread, would not go away. Nevertheless, my will, or my fear of God, my fear of failure, my fear of betraying Jesus, my fear of being a coward, whatever it was, would spurred me on. And I never said I wanted to go home or get out of there. I would struggle mightily, grappling myself to the mast by sheer willpower when imagination, emotions, and intellect battered my poor broken ship. The feeling of dread, the feeling that I felt, it was hard to explain and hard to express. I later on, when I was writing this book, of course, much later after my experience, um, I found a passage from the Jewish writer Eliezer ben Yehuda, 1882, when he arrived at Jaffa on finally reaching his beloved land. So this is describing uh, Eliezer coming back to his favorite land, to his native land uh, from Europe or from wherever. But instead of feeling satisfaction and joy, he felt a terrible sense of dread. It's kind of nice, the contrast here. He's coming back from exile to his native land. I am coming from my native land into exile, and we still have similar feelings. Yes, this was the coast of the land of my fathers. And the feeling of dread grew yet stronger within me. Nothing else did I feel, no other thought in my mind. I am afraid. After, and I didn't know I was afraid. I was so afraid, I didn't know I was afraid. When he wrote, he was aware of this. After about a quarter of an hour, my feet were standing upon holy ground, the land of our fathers. Yet in my heart was no feeling of joy, and in my head no thought, no idea whatsoever. My mind seemed to have emptied itself or turned to ice. It would not budge. This is making here another, I'm always doing parentheses here. But one of the things they tell us when we experience shock or when we experience trauma, uh, some people feel fear, some people cry out, some people jump, some people run around, some people get into panic. Very often, however, for some of us, it's you freeze. That's what happened to me. Well, to him, I mean, and maybe to me too, because I kind of froze in that state, and maybe for years, I don't know. Went into some kind of a trance, I don't know. Only one thing filled my heart, that same feeling of dread. I neither rent my garments, nor fell upon my face, nor embraced the stones, nor kissed the ground. I just stood there in astonishment, dread. Hanging in, next little paragraph, this, what is it, bestseller. Jose Maria Sanchez, the only English-speaking legionary in Salamanca, approached me one day. It was during manual labors. This is later on during my novitiate. I was working in the garden at the back of the chapel, where the narrow stained-glass windows looked ugly from the outside. He clumsily attempted to shame me into staying. I was already frozen. I didn't need it. But anyway, here he was, clumsy. He was clumsy physically and clumsy emotionally. Spiritually, I don't know. After all the trouble and expense the Legion and you have gone to, are you going to leave it all? He said in his plaintive voice. He mightn't have bothered, I say. Despite the pain, I was still firm in my decision. Hadn't I given my word to Father Quandro and to Father Maciel and to Jesus Christ himself? And we Irish were not quitters. The other 7 Irish novices who had travelled with me started getting sick. Somatization, excuse me. Sorry for my English. Somatization. Discussed this the other day with a psychologist friend of mine, and this is how some people take the shock, the difficulty, crisis, the overwhelming feeling of pain or whatever, they started getting sick. And I had been made the nurse of the community. This is probably very clever on the Legion side because somehow they figured out that I was a caring kind of a person. So I was going to basically, as I say, kind of forget myself and throw myself into helping others who I thought were worse off than I was. This is my big compassionate heart. So, hermano Pablo, enfermero in Salamanca. Anyway, funny story. Although butter was not butter and did not have the same taste, or thank God did not have the red stripe running through it, uh, we were not accustomed to eating lentils or chickpeas. I had never eaten them before and considered them food only for poor people, like putting margarine or Australian butter instead of Irish butter on your bread. So we passed the food. The food was passed around in the refectory, in the dining room, and each brother served himself. To the Spanish brothers, apparently, this food tasted like heaven. They relished it. Our Spanish language was very poor at the beginning, and we were still doing a lot of sign language and maybe muttering to ourselves in English. I remember personally having trouble with one of my old nemesis, callos, which means tripe. I don't know what else it's called. In light brown gravy, another delicacy apparently, and the industrial quantities of white rice, something which I was not accustomed to, and peas, yeah, very Spanish. Even the orejas de fraile, Spanish dishes, uh, which are fried batter in unusual triangular shapes, uh, supposedly like orejas de fraile, the ears, monk's ears in English. In Spanish, orejas de fraile with eggs was hard to take because the friar's eggs were sprinkled with sugar. Where's the fish and chips? Survival being the mother of invention, the first Irish novices devised a method to overcome the enemy. At the beginning, we were allowed to sit at the same table. One of us would test every new dish and give the go ahead or give the sign to the other seven sitting around the table about whether to, take this, or was it good, or could you stomach it, or would you get sick? Each would take a minimal amount of the dangerous food, and not to show disrespect or to disregard the rules. We all had to eat the same food. Signals would be sent under the table so as not to be seen by the rest of the community, who, for their part, must have been amused by this new secret code of the Irlandeses, los hermanos irlandeses. For the most part, these first days and weeks, we lived on fruit, Spanish grapes and watermelon, as much as faith, hope, and charity helped the first batch of Irish legionaries persevere in their vocation. Novice Master Father Army. I'm just going to go through this quickly because we're coming to my time limit here. After taking the habit, we were gently but firmly, gradually encouraged to avoid speaking English among ourselves, so as not to create a division among the novices. I was open to that suggestion and was always one of the most inclusive. I never had a problem with embracing Spanish and Mexican customs or people or language. Wasn't I going to be a missionary in Latin America, in Mexico? And so it was. But in hindsight, which of course this is one of many hindsights, um, we we couldn't be isolated. We couldn't keep our identity. We started becoming less Irish in a certain sense of the word, and we became part of this very intense group. Hasta la vista, which I'm sure you all know now from Arnold Schwarzenegger. Uh, until we meet again, until we see each other again. Take good care of yourselves. I'm doing my best. As you can see, I'm here in my professional studios in Guatemala, isolated and doing all the right things to keep myself safe and to keep the others safe. See you later. Hasta la vista.